The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Sarah Mitchell's kitchen in the quiet suburb of Brookhaven, Georgia, casting soft golden patterns across the hardwood floor. It was a Tuesday in early July, and the air outside was already thick and humid, promising another sweltering day in the South. Sarah stood at the counter, nursing her second cup of coffee, watching her daughter Emma play with her toy blocks on the living room carpet. The 3-year-old was humming softly to herself,
When the
completely
dog
absorbed
came
in the
in, I
task of
wasn't
stacking
scared
and
anymore.
unstacking the
He sat
colorful
right
wooden
next to
pieces,
me, and I
her
felt
tongue
safe.
poking out slightly in concentration. Buddy lay on his bed near the kitchen doorway, his massive
When
golden
the dog
frame
came
stretched
in,
out
I
lazily
wasn't
across
scared
the plush
anymore. He
orthopedic
sat
cushion
right
that
next to
Sarah had
me,
bought
and
him
I felt
specifically to
safe.
support his aging joints. At 7 years old, Buddy was entering his senior years, but he remained a
When the
striking
dog came
example of a
in, I
perfectly
wasn't
bred
scared
golden
anymore.
retriever.
He sat right
His coat
next to
was a
me, and
rich,
I felt
burnished
safe.
gold that seemed to glow whenever sunlight touched it. His eyes were warm and intelligent, with
When
a
the dog
gentle
came in,
expression that
I
had
wasn't
melted the
scared
hearts of
anymore.
countless
He sat
neighbors,
right next
friends,
to
and
me, and I
strangers
felt
over the
safe.
years. Every morning, Buddy would position himself exactly where he was now, close enough to keep watch
When
over
the
Emma,
dog came
yet
in,
far
I
enough to
wasn't
give
scared
Sarah
anymore.
space to work
He
in the
sat
kitchen.
right next to me, and I
Sarah
felt
had adopted
safe.
Buddy when he was just 2 years old, a beautiful rescue from a breeding facility that had closed down. The shelter had
When the
warned her that
dog
he
came
might
in,
have
I
behavioral
wasn't scared
issues, that
anymore.
he might be
He sat right
traumatized or
next to me,
aggressive
and I
given his
felt
uncertain
safe.
past. But Sarah, who had always been a believer in second chances and the transformative power of love,
When the
knew
dog came
instantly
in,
that
I
Buddy was
wasn't
different.
scared anymore.
From the
He
very
sat
first
right
day,
next to
he had
me, and
shown
I felt
nothing but
safe.
gentleness and affection. It was as if the dog understood that he'd been given a second chance at life, and was
When the
determined
dog
to
came
live it
in,
with
I wasn't
gratitude
scared
and joy.
anymore. He sat
When
right
Sarah
next to
became
me, and
pregnant
I
with
felt
Emma 5
safe.
years later, she worried about how Buddy would adjust to a baby in the house. She read countless books about introducing dogs
When the
to
dog
infants,
came in, I
attended
wasn't
training
scared
classes,
anymore.
and
He
consulted
sat
with
right next to me,
veterinarians.
and I felt
But her
safe.
concerns were unfounded. The moment Emma came home from the hospital, Buddy seemed to understand his role. He
When the
became her
dog came in,
protector, her
I wasn't
guardian,
scared
her faithful
anymore. He
companion.
sat right next to me,
As
and
Emma
I felt
grew from an
safe.
infant to a toddler, their bond deepened in ways that seemed almost magical to everyone who witnessed it. Now, as Sarah watched them both from the kitchen, she felt a profound sense of gratitude and peace. Emma looked up from her blocks and caught Buddy's eye. The dog's tail began to wag, a slow, gentle motion that seemed to communicate pure love. Emma giggled and toddled over to him, her tiny hands reaching out to pat his head. Buddy remained completely still, allowing her to touch him however she wanted. Sarah had observed this same scene hundreds of times, and it never failed to move her. The dog had an almost supernatural patience with Emma, as if he understood that she was fragile and precious and deserving of his complete protection and devotion. This was Buddy's greatest gift, his ability to sense emotions and respond with appropriate gentleness. When Emma was sick, Buddy would lie beside her bed, his presence somehow comforting. When Emma was sad or upset, Buddy would rest his head in her lap, offering silent support. When neighborhood children visited and played too roughly, Buddy would position himself between Emma and the chaos, a furry bodyguard ensuring she remained safe. He had never growled, never snapped, never shown even the slightest hint of aggression toward anyone, human or animal. The neighborhood itself was a testament to Buddy's character. The Brookhaven community was tight-knit and friendly, the kind of place where people knew their neighbors and looked out for one another. Everyone on Magnolia Street adored Buddy. Mrs. Chen next door frequently brought him homemade dog treats. The Johnson family across the street had named their golden retriever Mini Buddy because their children were so impressed by him. The mail carrier, Tom, always spent extra time greeting Buddy during his rounds, never feeling an ounce of fear or concern. Even the grumpy Mr. Patterson 3 houses down, who generally disliked dogs and had once threatened legal action against a neighbor's loud basset hound, had gradually warmed to Buddy and occasionally slipped him treats over the fence. Sarah's relationship with Buddy was equally profound. He had been her emotional anchor through difficult times, the painful divorce from her college boyfriend, the career setbacks, the struggles of single motherhood during Emma's early years. Buddy had never judged her for crying on his shoulder, for having bad days, for sometimes feeling overwhelmed by the responsibilities of raising a child alone. He had simply been there, steady and loyal, a constant source of unconditional love. The house itself reflected the bond they shared. Photographs lined the hallway showing Buddy at various stages of his life with the family. There was a picture of him as a younger dog, playfully posing with Emma as a tiny infant in Sarah's arms. Another showed him at the beach, sand covering his golden coat as Emma laughed beside him. A third captured him sleeping peacefully with 3-year-old Emma curled against his side like he was her personal teddy bear. These weren't just pictures. They were a visual chronicle of a family that had found completeness in one another. Sarah's parents had expressed concern about raising Emma without a father figure, but Sarah always pointed to Buddy. He teaches her about loyalty, about unconditional love, about the kind of gentle strength that matters most, she would say. Emma would grow up knowing what it meant to be protected, to be cherished, to be safe with a being who asked nothing in return except to be near her. This peaceful, idyllic existence was about to be shattered in ways Sarah could never have imagined. The trouble with David had been quietly brewing for months. Emma's father, who had never been particularly involved in her upbringing and lived 2 states away, had suddenly become obsessed with custody rights. He'd been posting angry messages on social media, claiming Sarah was keeping his daughter from him, threatening legal action. Sarah had done everything right. She documented his sporadic interest, his broken promises, his unreliability. Her lawyer had assured her that the courts would side with her. But David was determined and vindictive. He believed he deserved custody, and he was willing to do whatever it took to upend Sarah's world. Neither Sarah nor Buddy, as they moved through that peaceful July morning, had any idea that within hours, their quiet suburban life would be turned upside down. They didn't know that David was driving toward their house at that very moment, filled with rage and determination. They didn't know that one afternoon would set in motion a series of events that would test their family to its very limits. For now, in this final moment of innocence, Sarah sipped her coffee, Emma played with her blocks, and Buddy continued his faithful watch. It was the last perfect morning they would know for a long time. The doorbell rang at 2:47 in the afternoon. Sarah was in the laundry room folding clothes, a mundane task she performed almost robotically every Tuesday. Emma was napping upstairs, and Buddy was lying in his favorite spot on the kitchen tile, where the afternoon sun created a warm patch of light. The sudden sound of the doorbell made Sarah jump slightly. She wasn't expecting anyone. Her friend Michelle had texted earlier that she might drop by, but not until after 3 o'clock. Sarah wiped her hands on a towel and made her way to the front door, still holding a half-folded load of Emma's tiny clothes. Through the frosted glass panel beside the door, she could see a silhouette, broad shoulders, and aggressive posture. Something about the shape made her stomach clench. She didn't need to open the door to know who it was. She could feel it in her bones. David. She hadn't heard from him in 3 weeks. The last communication had been a threatening email from his lawyer, claiming that Sarah was alienating Emma from her father and that he intended to pursue full custody. Sarah's lawyer, Marcus Chen, had assured her it was just posturing, typical of bitter custody disputes. But something about David's escalating messages had unsettled her. She'd changed the locks, installed a new security system, and kept her phone close at all times. Sarah opened the door cautiously, leaving the chain lock engaged. David's face appeared in the narrow gap, flushed, angry, with wild eyes she'd never quite seen before. Even during their worst arguments years ago, she'd never witnessed this level of rage. "I need to see Emma. Now," he demanded, his voice rough and trembling with barely controlled fury. "You can't just show up here, David," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the fear rising in her chest. "You know the custody arrangement. You have to schedule visits through my lawyer." "I'm her father, Sarah. I have rights. I'm not asking permission, I'm taking my daughter. Sarah's hand trembled as she began to close the door. You need to leave. If you don't, I'm calling the police. David's hand shot up, blocking the door. He was stronger than her and they both knew it. Sarah's mind raced. Emma was upstairs, asleep. Buddy was in the kitchen. She needed to stay calm, needed to de-escalate this situation. Please leave, she said more firmly. This isn't helping your case. If you leave now, I won't call the police. But if you don't go, I will. And my lawyer will document this incident. For a moment, David seemed to consider her words. Then his expression hardened even further. Fine, but this isn't over. You can't keep her from me forever. He turned and stormed back down the walkway toward his car. Sarah quickly locked the door, her hands shaking so badly she could barely turn the deadbolt. She leaned against the door, taking deep breaths, trying to calm her racing heart. She'd handled that, she told herself. She'd stood her ground, but the interaction had shaken her deeply. She was so focused on her own distress that she almost didn't notice when she heard the car start, rev aggressively, and then, instead of pulling away, the sound of tires crunching on gravel as David drove around to the back of the house. Her blood ran cold. The backyard. He was going to the backyard. Sarah ran toward the kitchen, her mind spinning with panic. The back door. She needed to lock the back door. But before she could reach it, David was already there, pulling it open with violent force. He must have noticed it was unlocked during his previous visits, back when they were still trying to co-parent amicably, when he would pick Emma up for weekend visits. Stop, Sarah shouted, running toward him. Get out of my house. David stepped inside, his face twisted with determination and rage. You think you can keep my daughter from me? You think you can poison her against me? I'm taking her right now. Emma is asleep upstairs, Sarah said, her voice rising. You can't just take her. This is kidnapping, David. Do you understand what you're doing? I don't care anymore, David growled. I'm done playing by your rules, Sarah. I'm done with your games and your lies. She's my daughter, and I'm done letting you keep her from me. He moved toward the stairs. Sarah moved faster, positioning herself in front of him, her small frame blocking his path. No, you're not taking her, not like this, not ever like this. David's face flushed even darker. For a moment, Sarah thought he might push past her. Then he seemed to make a different choice, a choice that would alter the course of all their lives forever. He grabbed her arm roughly, his fingers digging into her skin. Get out of my way, he hissed. Sarah tried to pull away, but his grip was too strong. He dragged her toward the back door, toward the backyard, still screaming about his rights as Emma's father. Sarah screamed back, struggling against his hold, trying to plant her feet, trying to resist. She could feel the bruise forming on her arm where his fingers dug into her flesh. They stumbled out the back door into the blazing afternoon heat. The grass felt hot beneath Sarah's bare feet. She could see the neighbors' windows. Surely someone would hear her screams and call for help. David pushed her roughly against the fence, and that's when she heard it. A thunderous sound from inside the house, the sharp click of toenails on hardwood floor, accelerating toward them with devastating speed. Buddy had heard his family in distress. The golden retriever burst through the open back door like a torpedo, his massive body moving with a speed and purpose Sarah had never witnessed before. His eyes were locked on David, on the man who was hurting his person, his family, his reason for existing. 7 years of gentle, patient protection suddenly transformed into pure, focused instinct. David's eyes widened in terror. Get your dog off me, he shouted, releasing Sarah's arm and holding his hands up defensively. But Buddy's response was already in motion. 7 years of loyal companionship, of protecting Emma, of understanding his role as guardian of this family, it all crystallized in a single moment of action. His teeth found David's arm, and he bit down with the force of an animal protecting his pack from a predator. David screamed, a sound of pure pain and shock that echoed across the quiet suburban afternoon. Blood bloomed across his white shirt sleeve. Sarah gasped, stumbling backward, her mind struggling to process what was happening. This was Buddy. Gentle, patient, loving Buddy. But this was also Buddy defending his family from what his instincts recognized as a threat. Within minutes, sirens wailed down Magnolia Street. Neighbors emerged from their homes. Police cars pulled into the driveway. Animal control vehicles arrived. Everything happened in a blur of chaos and confusion. Sarah held Emma, who had woken from her nap, crying and confused about all the noise and commotion. David was loaded into an ambulance, his arm bleeding and requiring immediate medical attention. And Buddy, beautiful, protective, innocent Buddy, was led away in a metal cage by animal control officers, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face, confusion evident in his expression. As Sarah watched her beloved companion being taken away, she felt her world crumbling around her. She didn't know it yet, but this moment, this single afternoon, had just set in motion a legal battle that would challenge everything she believed about justice, love, and the bonds that held families together. The animal control facility on the outskirts of Atlanta was a cold, institutional building that smelled of disinfectant and despair. Sarah pushed through the heavy glass doors on Wednesday morning, her eyes red from a sleepless night. She hadn't slept. She'd spent the entire night holding Emma, who had finally cried herself into exhaustion, confused and traumatized by the sudden disappearance of her best friend. Sarah had tried to explain in age-appropriate terms that Buddy was staying at a special place for a little while. But 3-year-olds don't understand legal proceedings or the fragility of the situations that can destroy their worlds. Officer Michael Torres met her in the lobby, his expression sympathetic but professionally neutral. He was the same officer who had seized Buddy the previous afternoon, who had gently but firmly guided the confused dog into the metal cage while Sarah watched helplessly. "I need to see him," Sarah said immediately, her voice hoarse from crying. "I need to see Buddy. Please tell me he's okay." Officer Torres led her down a sterile hallway lined with cages. The sounds of distressed animals echoed off the concrete walls, dogs barking, whining, crying out in confusion and fear. Sarah's heart broke with each step. They stopped at a cage near the end of the corridor. Buddy was inside, lying on a thin mat in the corner, his back to the cage door. He didn't move when Sarah approached. His beautiful golden coat, usually so lustrous and well-groomed, looked dull and matted. His eyes, when he finally turned to look at her, were filled with a confusion and sadness that nearly broke her completely. "Buddy," she whispered, pressing her hands against the cold metal bars. "Baby, I'm so sorry. This is temporary. We're going to fix this. I promise." Buddy approached the cage door slowly, his movements sluggish and defeated. He pressed his nose against the bars, and Sarah reached through, her fingers touching his fur for the first time since the previous afternoon. He whimpered softly, a sound of despair that no dog should ever have to make. The heartbreak was almost unbearable. Officer Torres gave her 15 minutes. 15 minutes to reconnect with her companion of 7 years, to try to communicate across the barrier that suddenly separated them. When he indicated that her time was up, Sarah felt physically ill. She didn't want to leave him there. Every instinct screamed at her to break him out, to take him home, to restore their family to wholeness. "When can I take him home?" she asked desperately. Tor's sympathetic expression hardened slightly. "That depends on the court. There's been a formal complaint filed. Your ex-husband's legal team is requesting immediate euthanization based on dangerous dog protocols. There will be a hearing, probably within the next few weeks. You'll need a lawyer." Sarah's legs felt like they might give out. Euthanization. They wanted to kill Buddy. The word seemed impossible, surreal, like something that happened to other people, not to her innocent, gentle dog who had only been protecting his family. She called Marcus Chen from her car in the parking lot. Her lawyer picked up on the second ring, as if he'd been expecting her call. "I've already been contacted by his legal team," Marcus said gravely. "They're playing hardball, Sarah. They're claiming the dog attacked without provocation, that it's a dangerous animal, that it poses an immediate threat to public safety. They're pushing for fast-track euthanization. But that's not what happened, Sarah said, her voice rising. David attacked me. Buddy was protecting me. There were neighbors who saw. I know, Marcus interrupted gently. But we need evidence. We need documentation. We need to build an airtight case. Georgia's dangerous dog laws are strict, and honestly, we have an uphill battle. A dog that bites someone, even in a protective context, can be classified as dangerous under state law. Sarah felt her chest tighten. So what do? We start gathering evidence immediately. I need you to document everything. Every interaction Buddy has ever had with people, any training records, veterinary reports showing his temperament, neighbor statements. I'm going to request the security camera footage from your security system. That's going to be crucial. And we need to establish that your ex-husband's actions provoked the response. Over the next 3 weeks, Sarah became consumed by the case in a way that left little room for anything else. She spent hours writing detailed accounts of Buddy's behavior over the years. She contacted her veterinarian, Dr. Patricia Williams, who provided extensive medical and behavioral records documenting Buddy's gentle nature. She reached out to every neighbor on Magnolia Street, asking them to write formal statements about Buddy's character. Most responded enthusiastically, horrified at the prospect of him being euthanized. Even Mr. Patterson, the grumpy neighbor, sent a heartfelt letter describing how Buddy had changed his perspective on dogs entirely. She hired a dog behaviorist, Dr. James Mitchell, who reviewed the security camera footage and provided a professional analysis distinguishing between defensive and aggressive behavior. His report was damning to David's narrative. This dog's response, Dr. Mitchell wrote, is clearly protective in nature, triggered by the physical assault on his owner. There is no evidence of uncontrolled aggression or viciousness. This is a dog doing what dogs do, protecting his pack from perceived threat. But despite all this preparation, Sarah felt terrified. The media had picked up the story, sensationalizing it in ways that made her physically sick. Vicious dog attacks man in custody dispute, read one headline. Another proclaimed, dangerous golden retriever attacks over child custody. Online, strangers debated whether Buddy deserved to live or die. Some advocated passionately for his protection. Others called for his immediate execution. Sarah stopped reading the comments after a few days. The cruelty was too much to bear. What made it worse was visiting Buddy every single day. The facility allowed her brief visits, and each one was agony. Buddy was deteriorating. The vibrant, healthy dog she'd brought to animal control was becoming withdrawn and depressed. He barely ate. He spent most of his time lying in the corner of his cage, staring at nothing. Sarah could see the light going out of his eyes day by day. The kenneled conditions, the isolation from everything he loved, the uncertainty, it was destroying him from the inside out. One afternoon, after a particularly difficult visit, Sarah broke down completely in Marcus's office. "He's dying in there," she sobbed. "Even if we win the case, I'm going to get him back as a shell of himself. He's giving up." Marcus pushed a box of tissues across his desk, his expression deeply sympathetic. "We're going to win, Sarah. I truly believe that. The evidence is strong. David's behavior was indefensible. Buddy's response was protective, not aggressive. We have expert testimony, video evidence, and character witnesses. This case is winnable." "And if we don't," Sarah whispered. Marcus didn't answer. He didn't need to. They both knew what would happen if they lost. The court date was set for August 18th. As the date approached, Sarah felt like she was living in a nightmare she couldn't wake from. She was terrified, devastated, and simultaneously filled with a fierce determination to save her dog's life. Emma continued to ask for Buddy every single day. "Where's Buddy, Mommy? When can he come home?" Sarah didn't know how to answer. She didn't know if her daughter would ever see her best friend alive again. The night before the hearing, Sarah sat on her bed, holding one of Buddy's toys, a stuffed duck that he'd carried around for years. She pressed it to her chest and prayed, something she rarely did. "Please," she whispered into the darkness. "Please let them see the truth. Please let Buddy come home." She had no idea that the truth would come in the most unexpected way, delivered in a voice so innocent and pure that it would change everything. The Fulton County Courthouse stood imposing against the August sky, a massive structure of marble and steel that seemed to dwarf Sarah as she climbed the front steps. It was 8:47 in the morning on August 18th, and she felt physically ill. Marcus walked beside her, carrying his leather briefcase, his expression grave but determined. Behind them, a small contingent of supporters had gathered, neighbors from Magnolia Street, Sarah's parents, her best friend Michelle, and even Dr. Williams, Buddy's veterinarian, who had taken time off work to be present for moral support. The courthouse hallway was already crowded with reporters. Cameras flashed as soon as Sarah appeared. Microphones were thrust toward her face with aggressive questions. "Do you think your dog will be euthanized? Do you regret getting a dangerous animal? How do you respond to your ex-husband's injuries?" Sarah kept her eyes straight ahead, refusing to engage, letting Marcus's assistant shield her from the media circus. Inside the courtroom, the space was smaller than Sarah had expected, less grand and more intimate. Judge Patricia Hartwell was already at the bench, reviewing documents with an expression of focused concentration. She was a woman in her early 60s with steel-gray hair, sharp eyes, and a reputation for strict adherence to Georgia's dangerous dog statutes. Sarah's stomach twisted. This wasn't the judge she would have hoped for. David was already seated at the prosecution table with his lawyer, Richard Caldwell, a sharp-looking man in his 50s who radiated confidence bordering on arrogance. David looked genuinely injured. His right arm was in a sling, and he wore an expression of wounded victimhood that made Sarah's blood boil. He caught her eye across the courtroom and smiled slightly, a smile that communicated absolute certainty that he would win. Marcus led Sarah to the defense table. "Remember," he whispered, "stay calm, stay composed. Let the evidence speak for itself. You're not the one on trial here. Your character is solid. We're fighting for Buddy." The hearing commenced at 9:15 a.m. Judge Hartwell explained the proceedings in a clear, measured voice. "This was a dangerous dog hearing under Georgia Code Section 34-4, she explained. The burden of proof was on Sarah to demonstrate that Buddy was not a dangerous dog, that the incident in question was provoked or defensive in nature. If the court found Buddy dangerous, immediate euthanization would be ordered. There was no middle ground, no compromise. The stakes couldn't be higher." David took the stand first. Under Caldwell's questioning, he painted a picture of himself as a reasonable man, a devoted father simply trying to spend time with his daughter, who had been viciously attacked by a dangerous animal for no reason whatsoever. He described the attack in dramatic detail, his voice trembling with emotion as he explained how the dog had come out of nowhere and attacked him without warning or provocation. "I was simply trying to talk to Sarah about custody arrangements," David testified, his sling catching the light as he gestured. "I wasn't being aggressive. I was just visiting my daughter. Then suddenly this animal just came at me teeth first. I thought I was going to die. If I hadn't protected my arm with my sling, he would have bitten my face, my throat. This is a vicious, dangerous dog." The gallery was silent as David finished his testimony. Sarah watched the judge's face carefully, trying to read her expression, but it remained professionally neutral. Then Marcus stood for cross-examination. He was deliberately casual, almost conversational, but his questions were surgical in their precision. "Mr. Mitchell, you had a key to the back door of the house, correct?" Yes, from when I used to visit Emma more regularly." "And you used that key to enter the house without permission or announcement?" "I was trying to see my daughter." "That's not what I asked. Did you use the key to enter without permission?" "Yes, technically, but—" "And when Mrs. Mitchell tried to stop you from proceeding upstairs to get Emma, what did you do?" David's face flushed. "I was frustrated. She wasn't cooperating." Did you not physically grab Mrs. Mitchell's arm and pull her toward the backyard. I was trying to talk to her. That's a yes, correct? Yes, I grabbed her arm. Marcus turned to the judge. Your Honor, I'd like to present security camera footage from the house's security system. He nodded to his assistant, who activated the large screen beside the courtroom. The video played in crisp detail, David entering through the back door, his aggressive body language, his heated argument with Sarah, the visible physical contact, Sarah being pulled toward the fence. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Judge Hartwell leaned forward, her eyes fixed on the screen. Sarah could see the exact moment David shoved her against the fence, aggressive, violent, unmistakable. This footage, Marcus said calmly, documents unambiguous physical assault. It shows a man forcefully restraining and physically assaulting a woman. The dog in question did not attack unprovoked. The dog responded to his owner being physically assaulted. Dr. James Mitchell, the dog behaviorist, testified next. He explained the difference between aggressive and defensive behavior in dogs with the precision of a scientist. What we see in this video, he stated, pointing to the security footage, is a dog exhibiting protective, defensive behavior. The dog is responding to a perceived threat to his owner. His response is controlled and purposeful. He targets the threat, not random bystanders. This is not a dog exhibiting uncontrolled aggression or viciousness. Dr. Patricia Williams, Buddy's veterinarian, presented 7 years of medical records showing no history of aggression, no behavioral incidents, no complaints from any source. I have examined this dog hundreds of times, she testified. I have never observed anything but gentle, calm behavior. This is one of the most well-behaved, peaceful dogs I have ever treated in my 30-year career. Neighbors testified one after another. Mrs. Chen described how her own children played freely with Buddy and felt completely safe around him. The mail carrier talked about years of peaceful interactions. Even Mr. Patterson gave emotional testimony about how Buddy had inspired him to overcome his fear of dogs. The picture that emerged was overwhelming. This was not a dangerous dog. This was a beloved community member, a family protector, a gentle soul. But as the day wore on, Sarah noticed something troubling. Judge Hartwell's expression remained unchanged. She seemed unimpressed by the testimony, unmoved by the evidence. Her questions were pointed and skeptical. When Marcus presented the security footage again, emphasizing David's physical assault, the judge seemed to focus more on the bite itself than on the provocation. "A bite is a bite, Mr. Chen," she said at one point, her tone suggesting that context was irrelevant to her. Regardless of provocation, the dog did use force against a human being. Sarah's hope began to crumble. She could feel it happening, like sand slipping through her fingers. The evidence was overwhelming, but the judge seemed determined to follow the letter of the law rather than its spirit. In Georgia, dangerous dog laws were absolute. A dog that bit, provoked or not, could be deemed dangerous. As the hearing concluded at 5:30 p.m., Marcus squeezed Sarah's shoulder. "We presented an excellent case," he said quietly. "The evidence is overwhelmingly in our favor. Now we just have to wait for her ruling." But Sarah had seen the judge's face. She had read the subtle signs. She knew in her gut that they were in serious trouble. That night she sat in her living room, holding Emma as the child slept, and allowed herself to contemplate the unthinkable, that despite everything, despite the truth, despite the overwhelming evidence of Buddy's innocence, she might lose him anyway. She didn't know yet that salvation would come from the most unexpected source, from the innocent voice of a 3-year-old girl who saw the world with the clarity that only children possess. The courthouse hallway was emptying as attorneys packed their briefcases and reporters gathered their equipment. Judge Hartwell had adjourned the hearing until the following morning, when she would deliver her preliminary ruling. Sarah felt hollowed out, exhausted, running on nothing but anxiety and caffeine. Marcus was conferring with his assistant near the water fountain, reviewing notes and discussing strategy for closing arguments. That's when Marcus made a decision that would shock everyone, including Sarah. He approached her as she stood staring out the tall windows at the Atlanta skyline, her mind numb with worry. "I need to talk to you about something," he said quietly, glancing around to ensure privacy. "It's unconventional, it's risky, but I think it might be our only real chance." Sarah turned to face him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of hope. "What?" "I want to call Emma to testify tomorrow." Sarah's immediate reaction was visceral rejection. "Absolutely not. She's 3 years old, Marcus. She doesn't understand what's happening. This is terrifying enough for her without putting her on the witness stand." "I know it seems crazy," Marcus said, his voice calm and measured. "But hear me out. Judge Hartwell has been cold all day. She's focused on the legal technicality. The dog bit someone, therefore the dog is dangerous under the statute. She's not responding emotionally to the evidence. She's not seeing Buddy as a family member, as a beloved protector. She's seeing him as a legal problem that needs a legal solution. So how does putting my traumatized 3-year-old on the stand help that?" Sarah demanded, her voice rising slightly. "Because," Marcus said carefully, "Emma represents something Judge Hartwell can't ignore, the human element. The reality of what Buddy means to this family. A 3-year-old's testimony about her best friend, about how he protects her, about what happened that day, it's powerful. It's truthful. It's innocent and unfiltered in a way that adult testimony can never be." Sarah shook her head vehemently. "I won't do it. I won't traumatize my daughter for a case, no matter how important Buddy is." "Sarah," Marcus said gently, placing a hand on her shoulder, "what's more traumatic, testifying for 5 minutes, or growing up knowing her best friend was killed because we didn't do everything possible to save him?" Sarah felt tears burning her eyes. She hated that he was right. She hated that she was being forced to choose between protecting her daughter's immediate comfort and fighting for Buddy's life. All night, she wrestled with the decision, alternating between hope and guilt, between determination and despair. By morning, she had decided Emma would testify. The courtroom was more crowded on the second day. Word had spread through the legal community about the unusual dangerous dog hearing. Animal rights activists filled several rows of seats. The media presence was even more intense than the day before. Sarah held Emma's hand tightly as she entered, the small child clutching her stuffed bunny, confused and anxious about being at the courthouse again. Judge Hartwell entered at 9:00 a.m. sharp. Her expression gave nothing away. She announced that before she delivered her preliminary ruling, the defense had requested to call one additional witness. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Marcus stood. "Your Honor, the defense would like to call Emma Mitchell to testify." Immediate objections erupted from David's legal team. Caldwell shot to his feet, arguing that a 3-year-old was incompetent to testify, that allowing such testimony was prejudicial, that this was an obvious emotional manipulation attempt. Judge Hartwell held up her hand, silencing him. "Approach the bench," she commanded. For 10 minutes, Marcus and Caldwell argued passionately about Emma's competency to testify. Finally, Judge Hartwell made her ruling. "I'll allow limited testimony from the child. She may testify about her personal observations and experiences with the dog. However, the scope will be restricted, and I reserve the right to terminate the testimony if it becomes inappropriate." Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe as she led Emma forward. A bailiff helped the tiny girl into the witness stand, which seemed to dwarf her completely. Emma's feet didn't come close to touching the ground. Her small hands clutched the stuffed bunny so tightly her knuckles turned white. She looked absolutely terrified. Marcus approached slowly, keeping his distance, his voice gentle and warm. "Hi, Emma, my name is Marcus. Do you know why you're here today?" Emma shook her head, her bottom lip trembling slightly. "Well, we're here because we want to talk about your best friend. What's your best friend's name?" "Buddy," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible in the courtroom. That's right, Buddy. Emma, how long have you known Buddy? Forever, Emma said, her eyes welling up with tears. Since I was a baby. And Buddy is a dog, right? He's my best friend, Emma corrected, with the absolute certainty only a child could possess. What does Buddy do for you, Emma? How does Buddy make you feel? Emma was quiet for a long moment, her small face scrunched in concentration. He makes me feel safe. When I'm sad, he makes me happy. When I'm scared, he sleeps by my bed. Several jurors were now leaning forward, completely focused on the small child. Sarah noticed even Judge Hartwell's stern expression had softened slightly. Emma, do you remember what happened in the backyard, when your daddy was there? Emma's face crumpled. Fresh tears began to stream down her cheeks. My daddy was being mean to Mommy. He was pushing her. Mommy was crying. And what did Buddy do when your mommy was crying, when your daddy was pushing her? Emma looked directly at Marcus and her voice became stronger, more certain. Buddy came to help. Buddy went to protect Mommy. Buddy always protects us. Did Buddy act mean? Did Buddy act angry? No, Emma said firmly, shaking her head. Buddy was protecting. He was being brave. Buddy is always brave when Mommy needs him. Marcus nodded gently. Thank you, Emma. You did a very good job. He returned to the defense table and Caldwell stood for cross-examination, but he immediately sat back down. Questioning a crying 3-year-old about her dead best friend was political suicide. Everyone in the courtroom knew it. He had nothing to gain and everything to lose. But it was what happened next that would change everything. As the bailiff began to help Emma down from the witness stand, the child suddenly turned back toward the judge. Her small voice cut through the silence like a bell. Mommy says Buddy might have to go away forever, Emma said, her voice breaking. But Buddy didn't do anything bad. Buddy just loves us. Sarah felt her chest constrict. Judge Hartwell's face seemed to shift, emotions flickering across it, surprise, sadness, perhaps even recognition of the injustice she was about to perpetrate. Emma continued, her words tumbling out with the desperate urgency of a child trying to prevent an injustice. Buddy is the best friend. He's the goodest dog. He never, ever is mean. He just wanted to help Mommy. He just wanted to keep us safe. That's what best friends do. They keep you safe. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Sarah could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall. She could see tears streaming down the faces of neighbors, of Dr. Williams, of jurors. Even David's expression had shifted, uncomfortable with the raw emotion radiating from the small child. Judge Hartwell was staring at Emma with an expression Sarah couldn't quite read. When Emma was finally removed from the stand, the judge seemed to collect herself, adjusting her glasses and clearing her throat. We'll reconvene in 30 minutes for closing arguments, she announced, her voice slightly thick with emotion. As Sarah held Emma tightly, whispering reassurances and apologies for putting her through that ordeal, she felt something shift in the courtroom's energy. She didn't know for certain what would happen next, but for the first time since Buddy had been taken away, she felt a fragile seed of hope beginning to grow. The 30-minute recess felt like an eternity. Sarah sat in a small conference room adjacent to the courtroom with Marcus and Emma, who had finally stopped crying and was now exhausted, her small body curled against her mother's chest. Emma had drifted into an uncomfortable sleep, her breathing shallow and uneven. Sarah gently stroked her daughter's hair, feeling the weight of responsibility settle even more heavily on her shoulders. Marcus was packing, reviewing his closing argument notes, occasionally pausing to look out the window at the Atlanta skyline. His expression was thoughtful, contemplative. Finally, he turned to Sarah. You did the right thing, he said quietly. Bringing Emma here, her testimony was powerful, raw, real. That's what the judge needs to see, the human cost of this decision. But is it enough? Sarah asked, her voice hollow. She's a 3-year-old, Marcus. Judge Hartwell seemed unmoved by everything else we presented. Why would a child's tears change her mind? Because, Marcus said, sitting down beside her, sometimes what penetrates a judge's objectivity isn't legal argument or expert testimony. Sometimes it's the simple, unvarnished truth spoken by someone innocent enough to not understand politics or legal strategy. Emma wasn't trying to persuade the judge. She was just being honest about her feelings. That's powerful. Sarah wasn't convinced, but she wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that justice could prevail, that truth mattered, that the system could work fairly. But her experience over the past 3 weeks had shaken her faith in all of those things. At 9:32 a.m., they were called back into the courtroom. Sarah carried the sleeping Emma, settling her in the first row of seats beside her parents. She placed the stuffed bunny in the child's arms, hoping it would bring her comfort if she woke. Judge Hartwell took her seat at the bench, and the formality of the courtroom reasserted itself. The judge looked at Marcus. "Your closing argument, counselor." Marcus stood and approached the judge with quiet confidence. "Your Honor, we have presented overwhelming evidence that Buddy Mitchell is not a dangerous dog under Georgia law. We have 7 years of unblemished behavioral records. We have expert testimony from a board-certified animal behaviorist clearly distinguishing between aggressive and defensive behavior. We have documentation from a veterinarian with 30 years of experience confirming this dog's gentle nature. We have testimony from numerous community members who have interacted with this animal and can attest to his peaceful disposition." He paused, letting his words settle. "But more importantly," Marcus continued, "we have shown through video evidence that the incident in question was provoked by physical assault on the dog's owner. Under Georgia law, a dog is not considered dangerous if it acts in defense of its owner or property. The dog in question did exactly that. He protected his owner from attack. That is not dangerous behavior. That is protective behavior, and there is a critical difference." Marcus turned to face Judge Hartwell directly, his voice becoming more passionate. "Your Honor, this dog has lived peacefully in a suburban neighborhood for 7 years. He has never bitten anyone, never shown aggression, never posed a threat to anyone. In a single moment when his owner was being assaulted, he acted as thousands of dogs have acted throughout history. He protected his family. To classify him as dangerous would be to ignore the context of his actions, to ignore 7 years of exemplary behavior, and to ignore the clear video evidence of what actually occurred." He gestured toward Emma, still sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms. "And perhaps most importantly, Your Honor, we need to consider the human cost of euthanizing an innocent animal. This child has lost her father figure through circumstances beyond her control. This family has bonded with this dog in ways that have profound psychological and emotional significance. To execute this animal would be a travesty of justice." Marcus returned to his seat, and Caldwell stood for the prosecution's closing argument. "Your Honor," Caldwell began, his tone measured and professional, "the facts are simple. The dog bit a human being. That is the sole criterion we need to consider under Georgia's dangerous dog statute. Regardless of provocation, regardless of circumstances, a dog that uses its teeth as a weapon against a human being is, by definition, a dangerous dog. The statute exists to protect the public. We cannot allow emotional attachments to override public safety considerations." He paced before the judge, his arguments methodical and cold. "The defendant has presented a sympathetic narrative, a protective dog, a loving family, unfair circumstances. But laws exist for a reason. They exist to protect citizens from dangerous animals. If we make exceptions based on context, based on the animal's previous behavior, based on emotional appeal, then we undermine the entire legal framework designed to keep Georgians safe." Caldwell pointed toward David. "Mr. Mitchell came to visit his daughter and was viciously attacked. Under Georgia law, this dog is dangerous. The only appropriate remedy is euthanization." The courtroom fell silent as Caldwell took his seat. Judge Hartwell sat motionless for a long moment, her expression completely unreadable. Then she spoke. "I will need some time to consider this case carefully," she said, her voice formal. "However, before I adjourn to make my decision, I have a question for counsel." She looked directly at Marcus. "Counselor, does your client wish to make a personal statement to the court?" Marcus glanced at Sarah, who nodded. Sarah carefully stood, cradling Emma, and approached the judge's bench. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely keep her balance. "Your Honor," Sarah began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I don't have a lot to add to what my lawyer has said. But I need you to know who Buddy is. He's not a dangerous dog. He's a family member. He's a protector. He's a healer. He's the reason my daughter feels safe at night. He's the reason I survived the darkest periods of my life. And he did nothing wrong. He protected his family, and he shouldn't be punished for that." Sarah's voice broke. She was crying now, openly and without restraint. "Please don't take him from us. Please don't execute an innocent animal. Please see the truth of what happened." She turned to walk back to her seat when Emma suddenly stirred. The child woke from her restless sleep, disoriented and confused. She looked around the courtroom, her eyes landing on the judge. And that's when it happened. Emma, with the clarity that only comes from a child's innocent mind, looked directly at Judge Hartwell and asked a question that would echo through the courtroom and change everything. "Does the judge like Buddy?" Judge Hartwell seemed taken aback. The courtroom went absolutely silent. Sarah gently tried to guide Emma back to her seat, but the child persisted, her small voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "Why does the judge want to hurt Buddy?" Emma asked, her eyes filling with tears. "Buddy didn't hurt anyone. Buddy just wanted to protect Mommy." And then, as if accessing something deep and primal within her understanding of the world, Emma turned to the judge with complete certainty and spoke two words that would become legendary in Georgia's animal rights history. The entire courtroom held its breath. Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Judge Hartwell's expression shifted, her professional mask cracking completely. In that moment, something fundamental seemed to shift in the courtroom. The air felt charged with electricity, with possibility. Emma's small voice had just delivered what no lawyer, no expert testimony, no amount of legal argument could achieve. She had spoken the unvarnished truth, the simple reality that everyone in the courtroom suddenly understood with perfect clarity. The judge removed her glasses, a gesture of profound emotion. Her eyes were glistening with tears she was clearly struggling to contain. She looked at Emma, then at Sarah, then back at Buddy's empty chair, the chair where the dog should have been sitting, innocent and unaware of the injustice being perpetrated against him. "Court is adjourned," Judge Hartwell said, her voice thick with emotion. "I will deliver my ruling tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. But everyone in that courtroom knew that something fundamental had changed. The truth had been spoken by the most innocent voice in the room, and no judge could unhear it. The night before the ruling was the longest night of Sarah's life. She didn't sleep. She sat in her living room with the lights dimmed, Emma curled against her on the couch, both of them restless and anxious. Sarah's mind raced through every possible outcome, every scenario, every consequence. She thought about Buddy alone in his cage at animal control, not understanding why he'd been taken away, not comprehending that his life hung in the balance. She thought about the judge's face when Emma spoke those words, about the tears that had filled Judge Hartwell's eyes, about the way the entire courtroom had seemed to shift in that single moment. But she also thought about Caldwell's cold, methodical arguments about the law, about Georgia's strict dangerous dog statutes, about the judge's apparent attachment to legal precedent throughout the hearing. Could one child's innocent words really overturn years of judicial consistency? Could emotion trump law? Around 3 a.m., Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, "Praying for you both. See you at court." 8:30 a.m. She didn't respond. There was nothing to say. By 8:15 a.m., Sarah and Emma were sitting in the courthouse hallway, surrounded by the familiar faces of their supporters. Her parents sat on either side of them, her mother's hand gripping Sarah's arm reassuringly. Mrs. Chen, the neighbor who loved Buddy so much, was there with Dr. Williams, the veterinarian. Even Mr. Patterson had returned, sitting quietly in the back, his presence a testament to how much Buddy had changed his life. Reporters lined the hallway, cameras ready, sensing that something significant was about to unfold. Marcus arrived at 8:28 a.m., briefcase in hand. He looked like he hadn't slept either. His tie was slightly crooked, and his usually perfectly groomed hair seemed disheveled. But when he caught Sarah's eye, he offered a small, encouraging nod. Whether it was genuine confidence or an act of professionalism, Sarah wasn't sure, but she clung to it anyway. At 8:57 a.m., Judge Hartwell's bailiff emerged from the judge's chambers and announced that court was in session. The gallery filled quickly, more crowded than on either of the previous days. It seemed word had spread through the entire legal community about this unusual case. Animal rights advocates, legal scholars, journalists, and curious onlookers packed every available seat. Judge Hartwell took the bench with the same formal dignity she'd maintained throughout the hearing, but there was something different about her today. Her expression was contemplative, almost troubled. She didn't immediately launch into her ruling. Instead, she removed her glasses and set them on the desk in front of her, a gesture that suggested she was about to deliver something deeply personal rather than merely procedural. "This has been an unusual case," Judge Hartwell began, her voice carrying through the silent courtroom. "In my 28 years on the bench, I have presided over many dangerous dog hearings. Most of them are straightforward applications of Georgia law. A dog bites someone, the dog is deemed dangerous, and the appropriate legal remedy is pursued. But this case has presented me with something more complex than a simple legal question." She paused, her eyes scanning the courtroom, landing briefly on Emma, who sat silently between Sarah and Sarah's mother. "I came into this hearing prepared to follow the letter of Georgia's dangerous dog law," the judge continued. "The evidence was clear that the dog in question had bitten Mr. Mitchell. Under a strict interpretation of the statute, that single fact would be sufficient to declare the dog dangerous and order euthanization." Sarah felt her hope beginning to crumble. This sounded like a prelude to a guilty verdict, a judge laying out the legal reasoning before delivering the inevitable decision against them. "However," Judge Hartwell said, and Sarah heard the entire courtroom intake a collective breath, "during these proceedings, I was reminded of something I had perhaps forgotten in my years of administering justice, the difference between law and justice. These are not always the same thing." The judge leaned forward slightly. The evidence presented by the defense was overwhelming. Expert testimony, behavioral records, community testimony, and most importantly, video documentation all clearly demonstrate that this dog acted in defense of its owner, not in unprovoked aggression. The dog did not display the characteristics of a dangerous animal. The dog displayed the characteristics of a protective family member acting to prevent harm to someone it loved. She paused again, and this time her eyes fixed directly on Emma. "But what truly changed my perspective," Judge Hartwell said slowly, "was the testimony of a 3-year-old child. A child who, without understanding the complexities of law or courtroom procedure, simply told the truth about her experience. She told us that the dog makes her feel safe. She told us that the dog protects her family. She told us, with the unshakable certainty that only innocent children possess, that the dog was protecting her mother." Judge Hartwell's voice became slightly thicker with emotion. "That child's testimony reminded me that behind every legal case are human beings, and in this case, a child, whose lives will be profoundly affected by my decision. I cannot ignore the human cost of my judgment." Sarah felt her mother's grip tighten on her arm. Tears were streaming down her face, but she didn't dare interrupt the judge's words. "Therefore," Judge Hartwell announced, her voice becoming stronger and more decisive, "I find that the dog in question, known as Buddy Mitchell, is not a dangerous dog as defined under Georgia Code Section 3044. The dog's actions were defensive in nature, triggered by physical assault on his owner. The dog does not pose an ongoing threat to public safety. The dog has a 7-year record of peaceful coexistence within the community. The dog is released into the custody of Sarah Mitchell, effective immediately, pending certain conditions. The courtroom erupted. Gasps, cheers, and emotional exclamations filled the space. Several people were openly crying. Mrs. Chen was sobbing with joy. Dr. Williams had her hands over her mouth. Even some of the reporters seemed genuinely moved by the verdict. Judge Hartwell held up her hand, and the courtroom gradually quieted. "However," she continued, "I am imposing certain conditions on this release. The dog must complete an advanced obedience training program to be certified by a professional trainer within 4 weeks. The dog must wear a leash whenever in public spaces. The dog must remain under close supervision at all times, and Mr. Mitchell is hereby ordered to have no unsupervised contact with the child, Emma, pending the outcome of your custody proceedings." She looked directly at David. "Furthermore, I am providing a copy of this ruling and the security camera footage to the family court judge who will be hearing your custody case. Your violent behavior toward Ms. Mitchell, documented on video, will be considered in those proceedings." David had gone pale. His lawyer was whispering urgently in his ear, but David seemed to have completely withdrawn, understanding that he had not only lost this battle but had severely damaged his position in the custody war that lay ahead. Judge Hartwell looked back at Sarah. "Ms. Mitchell, your dog will be released to you this afternoon. The animal control facility has been notified of my ruling. I suggest you bring your daughter to pick him up. I suspect both of them have some celebrating to do." Sarah couldn't respond. She was crying too hard to speak. She stood on shaking legs and looked at Emma, who seemed to understand that something momentous had happened. "Buddy's coming home," Emma whispered. "Yes, baby," Sarah managed to say through her tears. "Buddy's coming home." The gallery erupted again as Judge Hartwell banged her gavel and declared the hearing adjourned. Reporters surged forward with questions, but Marcus shielded Sarah and Emma, guiding them toward the exits. Well-wishers reached out to touch Sarah's shoulders, to congratulate her, to express their joy at the verdict. But Sarah's mind was already focused on one thing and one thing alone: getting to animal control to bring her beloved companion home. The animal control facility had never seemed so welcoming. Sarah pulled into the parking lot at 2:47 p.m., exactly 1 week to the minute since Buddy had been taken away. Emma sat in her car seat, bouncing with excited energy, clutching her stuffed bunny and repeating "Buddy's coming home, Buddy's coming home" like a mantra. Sarah's parents were in the car behind them, along with Marcus, who had insisted on being present for this moment. Officer Torres met them at the entrance, and for the first time since Sarah had met him, he was smiling. A genuine, warm smile that spoke volumes about his feelings on the verdict. "Congratulations," he said, shaking Sarah's hand. "I knew this was the right outcome. That dog never should have been in here. I've seen a lot of animals in my career, and Buddy is one of the gentlest I've ever encountered." They walked through the familiar sterile hallway, past the cages with their distressed animals. Sarah's heart ached for each one, wondering how many of them had similar stories, how many had been judged unfairly by a system that didn't account for context or circumstances. But her focus was singular: getting to Buddy. They stopped at the cage at the end of the corridor. Buddy was lying in the same corner where he'd spent the past week, his coat still dull, his eyes still carrying that haunted sadness that came from abandonment and uncertainty. But the moment he heard Sarah's voice, everything changed. His head lifted, his ears perked up. His tail began to wag slowly at first, then with increasing vigor. He scrambled to his feet, his movements suddenly energized, as if a switch had been flipped inside him. When Officer Torres opened the cage door, Buddy didn't rush out aggressively or frantically. Instead, he approached slowly, deliberately, his entire body trembling with emotion. Sarah dropped to her knees, and Buddy walked into her arms, pressing his face against her chest, his whole frame shaking with what could only be described as joy and relief. He whimpered softly, a sound of such profound emotion that several people in the room had to look away, overwhelmed by the rawness of the moment. "Oh, baby," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face as she held her dog. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I had to leave you here, but you're coming home now. You're coming home where you belong." Emma toddled forward, having been lifted from her car seat by Sarah's mother. The moment Buddy saw her, his entire demeanor transformed. He stood carefully, mindful of the small child, and gently licked her face as she threw her tiny arms around his neck. "Buddy," Emma squealed with pure, unfiltered joy. "You came home. I knew you would come home." Buddy's tail wagged so hard his entire back half seemed to wiggle. He pressed his face against Emma's, covering her with gentle kisses, and Sarah could see the exact moment her dog's spirit began to heal. This was what he had been missing, not just food and shelter, but purpose, connection, the presence of the family he loved more than anything in the world. Sarah's parents were crying openly. Marcus stood with his hand over his heart, visibly moved by the reunion unfolding before him. Even Officer Torres had to wipe his eyes, pretending to be adjusting his glasses. The paperwork took another hour. Release forms, documentation of the conditions Judge Hartwell had imposed, instructions for the required obedience training program. But Sarah barely heard any of it. She was focused entirely on Buddy, on watching the light return to his eyes, on feeling the warmth of his presence beside her once again. When they finally walked out of the animal control facility, Buddy walking between Sarah and Emma, the afternoon sun seemed brighter than Sarah had ever seen it. The world looked different now, not just because of the legal victory, but because her family was whole again. 3 weeks later, Buddy had completed his advanced obedience training with flying colors. The certified trainer, a woman named Lisa Rodriguez, had called Sarah to report that Buddy was the most well-behaved, gentle dog she'd ever worked with. "This dog doesn't need training," Lisa had said. "This dog is already perfect. He just needed his confidence restored." Now, as Sarah watched Emma and Buddy playing in their backyard on a warm August afternoon, she felt a profound sense of peace settling over her life. Buddy wore a leash when they went on public outings, but at home, he was free to be himself, gentle, protective, loving. The legal fallout from the case had been significant. Buddy's story had spread nationally, picked up by major news outlets and animal rights organizations. Sarah had been contacted by legislators interested in amending Georgia's dangerous dog laws to account for context and provocation. Legal scholars were using her case as a precedent for rethinking how the law approached protective animal behavior. Emma had become something of a minor celebrity, the 3-year-old whose 2 words had changed the legal landscape. But what mattered most to Sarah was happening right here in her backyard. Emma was building a sandcastle and Buddy was lying nearby, watching her carefully, ready to protect her from any perceived danger. This was their life now, simpler, happier, more complete than it had been in a long time. The custody case with David had been decided in Sarah's favor. Judge Hartwell's comments in the dangerous dog hearing had indeed influenced the family court judge. David's violent behavior had been documented, analyzed, and used against him. Sarah now had full legal custody of Emma, with David limited to supervised visitation only. The threat that had set this entire ordeal in motion had been neutralized. 6 months later, Sarah sat in a legislative office in downtown Atlanta, testifying before a committee that was considering amendments to Georgia's dangerous dog laws. She had Buddy with her. The dog had become the face of the movement to reform the state's dangerous dog statutes. "These laws were created with good intentions," Sarah told the committee members, "to protect public safety. but they don't account for context. They don't distinguish between an animal acting aggressively and an animal acting protectively. My dog didn't attack my ex-husband because he's vicious or dangerous. He protected his family because that's what dogs do when they love someone. She paused, looking at the photographs displayed on the screen behind her. Images of Buddy throughout his life. Images of him with Emma. Images of his gentle nature. Georgia's law should be reformed to require investigation into the circumstances of any incident before declaring a dog dangerous, Sarah continued. A dog that protects its owner from assault, that shows no other aggressive behavior, that has a history of gentleness and peaceful coexistence. That dog should not be executed under the law. That would not be justice. That would be a travesty. The committee voted unanimously to move the bill forward. Within 2 years, Georgia had passed new legislation that accounted for context and provocation in dangerous dog cases, becoming a model for other states to follow. 1 year later, Buddy had become a certified therapy dog, visiting hospitals and schools throughout Atlanta. Children who were afraid of dogs learned to trust through their interactions with him. Elderly patients in nursing homes found comfort in his gentle presence. Emma often accompanied her best friend on these visits, holding his leash proudly while he worked his quiet magic on everyone he encountered. Sarah stood in her backyard on a warm spring evening, watching her daughter and her dog play together, watching the bond that had survived a legal crucible continue to deepen and strengthen. Buddy was older now, his muzzle graying slightly, but his spirit was as vibrant as ever. She thought about Judge Hartwell, who had visited their home months earlier. The judge had seen Buddy in his natural environment, playing gently with Emma, and had confirmed that she'd made the right decision. "That dog is innocent," Judge Hartwell had said simply. "But more than that, he's irreplaceable. Thank you for fighting for him." Sarah thought about Emma's 2 words, "Protect Mommy," and how they had rippled out across Georgia, across the country, creating change and inspiring others to reconsider the narratives they'd been told about animals and protection and justice. Most of all, she thought about Buddy, about his loyalty, his gentleness, his unwavering devotion to the family he loved, about how one dog's act of protection had nearly cost him his life, and how one child's innocent testimony had saved him, about how love in all its forms could triumph even against a system designed to work against it. As the sun set over their quiet suburban street, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Sarah called Buddy and Emma inside for the evening. The dog responded immediately, his tail wagging, eager to be wherever his family was. Emma skipped beside him, holding his collar, completely secure in the knowledge that her best friend would always protect her, would always be there, would always love her unconditionally. The nightmare was over. Justice had prevailed, and a 3-year-old girl and her golden retriever had changed the world, one innocent statement at a time. The end.